Jack the Ripper is one of the most infamous serial killers of all time. The eerie contents of his murders and mystery surrounding his identity have intrigued many for over a century. However, I'm willing to bet that when you hear Jack the Ripper, you don't immediately think anti-Semitism. However, anti-Semitism is an important and noteworthy aspect of the Jack the Ripper case. Because the murders took place in a predominantly Jewish area, anti-Semitic sentiment quickly grew within London's East End. The blame was quickly placed on England's Jewish population and citizens. Today, we'll discuss the significance of anti-Semitism in the Jack the Ripper case. Marianne Nichols, Anne Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly are the confirmed canonical 5 victims of Jack the Ripper. Murder and violence against prostitutes wasn't uncommon at the time and was very rarely reported on by the media. However, these attacks were incredibly brutal, which drew great attention to the case and allowed for Jack the Ripper's violent modus operandi to be established. The bodies of Nichols, Chapman, Eddowes, Stride, and Kelly were found meticulously mangled. In some cases, even abdominal organs like kidneys, bladders, and uteruses had been removed. In total, 11 murders happened at the time in the Whitechapel district of London's East End, known simply as the Whitechapel murders. However, only the aforementioned 5 have been successfully linked and connected to Jack the Ripper. The East End of London, where the murders took place, was home to a large Jewish population, even being dubbed, quote, the Jewish colony in London, end quote, by Sunday magazine. Many migrated to England hoping to escape the horrific pogroms at the time in Eastern Europe. Even Aaron Kosminski, one of the prime suspects in the Jack the Ripper case, whom we'll discuss more later. Tensions were incredibly high both before, during, and after the Jack the Ripper murders, with violence and prejudice against the Jewish population quickly increasing, and those in positions of power did little to ease these tensions. Times of Israel writes, quote, rabble-rousing politicians rallied against overcrowded England becoming the human ash pit for the refuse population in the world, end quote. Newspapers frequently referred to Jews in the area as, quote, foreigners, pests, and menaces, end quote. In the East End, both immigrants and English natives struggled with exploitation within the workplace. Stress was only added to when the Jews were used as scapegoats, with the natives believing they were being cheated out of better, higher-paying jobs. Eventually, when the Jack the Ripper murders played out, Jews were quickly, easily, and frequently blamed for the murders. One suspected witness of the Annie Chapman murder described the murder as seeming, quote, foreign, end quote. The coroner responsible for the examination of Chapman's body claimed that the murderer showcased, quote, Judas-like approaches, end quote. Another suspected witness, now of Marianne Kelly's murder, stated that the killer was, quote, of Jewish appearance, end quote. These remarks enabled and seemingly confirmed for the citizens that the murderer was Jewish, and they ran with it. Riots quickly broke out within London, with chants like, quote, down with the Jews, end quote, reportedly being heard. In addition to this, newspapers claimed that the Jack the Ripper murders had some association with blood libel, an age-old anti-Semitic idea that Jews commit murder and use the blood in sacrificial rituals. Before gaining the well-known title now of Jack the Ripper, the murderer was known in newspapers at the time as Leather Apron. Leather Apron was described as being, quote, a Jew or of Jewish parentage, his face being of a marked Hebrew type, end quote. Locals in Whitechapel began to know Leather Apron as being a bootmaker, John Pizer. Pizer was a Polish Jew, and the only evidence against him was that he had a previous stabbing offense, and he was a Jew. Pizer was later arrested and questioned, and he doubted the validity of his arrest and questioning. It's been suggested by some that Jack the Ripper may have intended for the blame to be purposefully placed on the Jews of London, hoping to fuel the anti-Semitic sentiment in the area. Evidence for this includes the fact that Elizabeth Stride was attacked and killed near a Yiddish newspaper that was frequented at the time by Jewish socialists. And in addition to this, Catherine Eddowes was subsequently murdered near a Jewish synagogue. The only person known to have, beyond a reasonable doubt, saw Jack the Ripper, saw him while he was attacking and killing Elizabeth Stride. He reportedly shouted Lipsky at him. Lipsky was a local anti-Semitic term coined after Israel Lipsky, a Polish Jew who had been arrested and executed for murder. An incredibly important piece of evidence and the reason why I looked further into this subject that displays perfectly the horrific, rampant anti-Semitism of the time is the Golston Street graffito. With a bloody handkerchief found underneath it from one of Jack the Ripper's victims, it read, quote, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing," end quote. As rioting became increasingly prevalent and dangerous in London's East End, the police chief ordered that the graffiti be immediately cleaned. Police Superintendent Thomas Arnold stated, quote, "A strong feeling existed against the Jews, generally, and as the building upon which the writing was found was situated in the midst of a locality inhabited principally by that sect, I was apprehensive that if the writing were left, it would be the means of causing a riot, and therefore considered it desirable that it should be removed, having in view the fact that it was in such a position that it would have been rubbed by persons passing in and out of the building," end quote. The claim that the graffiti artist is Jack the Ripper himself has been heavily scrutinized. Though it's unreliable evidence itself, evidence against this claim is that the infamous Dear Boss letter, which was believed to have been written by Jack the Ripper, did not match the writing in the graffiti. Graffiti was incredibly prevalent at the time, meaning anyone could have and would have written the graffiti. It's widely accepted that Jack the Ripper didn't write this graffiti because it didn't align with his elusive, swift tactics he used when murdering the victims. 3 general explanations are given as to who and why this graffiti was made. Firstly, it's believed that it was written by someone else, someone who's not Jack the Ripper, and that the piece of clothing coincidentally was there. Secondly, it's believed that Jack the Ripper was Jewish and did write it purposefully to incriminate himself and his community. And lastly, it's believed that Jack the Ripper was not Jewish and did write this in an attempt to blame the Jewish population, diverting the blame from himself. One of the prime suspects of the Jack the Ripper case mentioned earlier was Aaron Mordka Kosminski. He was a Polish Jew fleeing Poland from the pogroms of the time. He was heavily monitored by Scotland Yard, being followed, and eventually it was found that he was, quote, "very likely," end quote, to be Jack the Ripper by the London Criminal Investigation Department. Police commissioners at the time were split on whether or not Kosminski was the murderer. One police commissioner claimed it was, quote, "a reckless accusation," end quote, against Jews. Another police commissioner, Robert Anderson, believed Kosminski was Jack the Ripper, but was doubtful that the witness that had undoubtedly seen him would testify against him, as the Jewish law of Messiah prohibits Jews from incriminating each other. Over a century later, in 2014, new evidence arose that attempted to connect Kosminski further to the crimes. DNA evidence from the scarf of one of the victims was found, potentially further linking Kosminski to the crimes. Kosminski's descendants quickly came forward anonymously to claim that Aaron Kosminski was mentally ill, and that if he was the murderer, it had absolutely nothing to do with his Jewish identity. They established these facts, fearing that the new evidence would bring back a new era of anti-Semitism nearly a century later. With all that being said, whether Jack the Ripper was or was not Jewish, and whether he did or did not try to purposefully incriminate the Jews of Whitechapel, London's East End regrettably faced incredible amounts of violence and discrimination. So much so that it was so overwhelmingly strong that it was feared it would come back over 126 years later. I appreciate you for sticking around and watching this. If you enjoyed, please like and subscribe. This is my first time doing a video like this, so I hope it's good, and I'll leave some links in the description to some websites I used, and have an amazing day.